This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.
Hello and welcome to the History of Aviation podcast, the podcast series where we discuss historic aircraft. I'm Derrick Beeler, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts David Rowe and Dave Gorman. In this episode 28, we'll be discussing the McDonnell Douglas MD-80. The McDonnell Douglas MD-80 is a series of 5 single-aisle airliners developed by McDonnell Douglas. From his studio near Bristol, Tennessee, Mr. David Rowe. How you going, Dave?
It's exciting times here at the Rowe household. We have last night we had a couple of tornado warnings, which kept me up late watching the skies and watching the lightning and the thunder, making sure everything was going to be okay, and it was. We also have added 2 cats to the house, 2 young, about 5-month-old cats. So I've got cats leaping and scratching, and so a lot of excitement there. Yeah, and teaching the dog how to deal with that. So my life is exciting right now.
Sounds like
May I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
From his studio in Knoxville, Tennessee, Mr. Dave Gorman. How are things, Dave?
Hey, fellas, things are pretty good. We're really getting up to speed here at back at school, so kids are getting back in the habit of not staying up really late, getting up early. And hey, so am I. I have not done a lot of plane spotting. I kind of got my fill, believe it or not, in Oshkosh. So I was able to spend the weekend with a couple of my good buddies and their wives and our dogs. And my wife up in North Carolina had a really nice time. Did not see a single plane fly over for 2 days. It was really kind of strange. But rather than going through withdrawals, I made it just fine. I was really, coming back home. I got notification about that MiG-23 that crashed up in Michigan at the Thunder Over Michigan Air Show. David and Bruce Kawakami and I were at that show a year ago and had talked about going to this particular show, but did not go because they've got some kind of funky seating and ticket buying arrangements going on right now. But
tell me about it.
Yeah, Bruce and I saw that MiG in person just 2.5 weeks ago in Wisconsin. Was so sad to see that it was lost, but amazingly, both the pilot and passenger ejected safely over water. Some reports now the pilot had some injuries, but will survive. And the plane itself, out of control, crashed into the ground. It looks like a mostly flat configuration next to an apartment building and did not injure anybody on the ground, which is absolutely stunning and fortuitous. So very glad to have that news come out of that sad tragedy. So unbelievable.
Totally unbelievable when it came across, and it was just like, man, I hope everybody gets out, and sure enough they did. So we'll take lucky any day.
Definitely.
No doubt. And then from his studio in Alcoa, Tennessee, Derrick Beeler. Derrick, how you been, buddy?
Oh, everything is going kind of slow day at McGee Tyson, a normal day in the rental business. And we're just, we're hanging in there and trying to find a place to put all these cars. But yeah, definitely, guys, today's subject, the Mad Dog, as they like to call it. And one of my favorite sayings in aviation come from this plane. It takes off like a rocket and makes a heck of a lot of noise doing it.
Now, wait a minute. You said heck of a lot of noise. That sounds beautiful to me.
Yeah, I did. I actually cleaned it up. It's actually something else of a lot of noise.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah, well, I like that sound.
We're G-rated here.
I understand. I think that's just fine. You never know who might be listening. But right. Now we were kind of laughing before the show. I said that I've flown on the MD-80 several times. and oftentimes I seem to be sitting not too far from the engines, inside the plane at least, but not a great place to sit inside next to the engines. Hey, I got a window seat, but I can't hear anything, and my head hurts, and I don't really want to look out the window right now.
Well, but the good news is this is a short haul aircraft, so you weren't in it for a long time. It was a short hop, just an hour or two, or here to there, small airports.
Well, and that is true, and it served really well in that role for about 40 years or so of service, something like that. Maybe a little bit longer.
Well, I mean, it's still serving to this day. They're still out there working as freighters. So the passenger business has passed them by, but freight use is still a main draw for this aircraft. It still has its uses for that. It's a pretty useful airplane. It's been around since the 70s. So long life.
Yeah, it's just got a classic kind of classic look to it with the engine positions, the streamlining and everything. I mean, kind of standard stuff, but you see that that same kind of signature look in some current aircraft that are not MD-80s. We were talking about that too. All those CRJs have that same kind of layout, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They're basically a continuation of what Douglas designed here. Is this the DC-9 series, which is what the MD-80 is based off of. It's just a great classic look, that high T-tail, twin engines in the back. You've got those long, thin wings and this really long nose of an airplane. It always amazes me when you see it flying because the nose is so long, it sticks out there for a mile, it feels like. And, these planes carried, 130, 150 passengers. So they're not huge, but again, they're short haul. So if you're going to a hub from your local town, small town airport, this is the type of plane from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s that you would have flown on, the MD-80 series.
Well, and what's the capacity of the MD-80?
Well,
generally speaking, I mean, they could be outfitted in different ways and everything, but generally speaking, how crowded would you be, David or Derrick? You mentioned 5 abreast in the passenger cabin.
Mm-hmm.
Maximum is about 170 passengers. So the largest, the MD-88, I believe, was about 170 people you could squeeze in there. The smallest was about 131. So, 130, 170, about the same. Just depends on the length.
And comfort. 170 would be pretty tight.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. 5 across. And, but again, short haul, we're trying to get you from A to B and get you into a bigger plane and get you on your way. So that was the whole purpose of this design, was to move people quickly from a small places to a bigger place. And,
absolutely.
This was actually, like I was saying, originally was called the DC-9, and they decided to make a bigger version of the DC-9. They were going to call it the Super 80. And so they started out building some DC-9s, and at one point, Douglas Aircraft merged with McDonnell Douglas. So you've got Douglas Airplane. They are great at passenger aircraft. Go back to the DC-3, the DC-4 in the 40s and 50s, the DC-8, which was a competitor to the 707 from Boeing. So they were really, really good in the passenger airline business. And then you've got McDonnell Aircraft Company, and they are on the military side. They're building Phantoms and lots of other, military aircraft. So it seemed like a really good match to have these two companies come together and bring the best of both worlds together. And for about 10 or so years there, they were a really good match up until Boeing came along, and then Boeing sucked them up sort of like they do with all the other smaller companies. But that's where we get the MD from, is because McDonnell and Douglas merged into the McDonnell Douglas company. So they took that DC-9 and they improved it. So there were, like you were saying, there were 5 versions. There's an MD 80, 83, 81, 82, 83, 87, and 88 in the 80 series. And basically it's just a bigger, faster version each time they created a new one.
Now, Derrick, not everybody can see, of course, the picture that you have behind you. You've got one of these in the colors and livery of the American Airlines. And David, that to me, it always seems to be like that's the airline I associate an awful lot with this particular airplane. Is that, am I right that was one of the bigger operators?
Yes, as a matter of fact, they purchased 383 of the MD-80 series. So yeah, they were a big purchaser of the aircraft in the U.S. Delta was originally a DC-9 operator, and then they came on and bought some MD-80s later. But American was the first in the U.S. that bought a huge amount of them. So yeah, quite a bit flown by American.
So I guess that, like you say, then chances are if you were flying within the country in the 80s and 90s and even in 2000s and flying American, you almost certainly flew MD-80s.
Correct. But not only in the U.S., the very first customer for the MD-80 series was Swissair. So it was an overseas airline. It was not even an American airline. It was, or not American Air. It wasn't a U.S. airline. It was Swissair overseas. So there was interest in this aircraft across the world. And as a matter of fact, I've got a long list of customers here, all from, Italy and Holland and let's say Swissair, China Eastern Airlines. I mean, it literally flew across the world. It was everywhere.
And so, again, with that capability to get people on these short hauls, some of the cities in Europe are a lot closer than some of the destinations in the U.S. So it lent itself really well to international travel, country to country in Europe, I guess, for those reasons. But also, like you said, in China as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's. I think we used it mostly to move people to the hubs and to move people on to other locations. Whereas, like you're saying, in Europe, it's just a short hop from country to country. So these are perfect for that kind of thing. Just hop on and you're in the next country in just an hour or two. So it's a much better than driving across a mountain, the Alps or something. We can just hop a plane and go.
Well, this was a pretty easy plane to operate, I get the impression of. I mean, it had just a crew of 2, is that correct? Just a pilot and co-pilot?
Yes, it sure did. There was an interesting thing I read about that. The Airline Pilots Association were kind of resistant to this because when the MD-80s were first coming out, passenger aircraft had 3 pilots on board. So a pilot, co-pilot, and a spare, I guess. And they were resistant to the 2 pilots in the cockpit only. So that kind of put a slow down on the purchasing of this aircraft in the beginning. And McDonnell Douglas had to do a PR campaign where they went around the world to show people that this plane was perfectly safe, worked as great with 2 as 3, and that helped build up some sales over time. But they had to work at it because this was a different way of operating, 2 as opposed to 3 pilots.
Maybe a flight engineer, things like that you had traditionally coming out of the 50s and 60s. And
yep, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. That was. You're breaking tradition is what it was. At least that's the way I took it, is that, traditionally, you've got that third person sitting back there watching all the dials, and this plane doesn't require that. Now, it was all analog. The MD series is basically up until the end before they became digital type aircraft. They were all steam gauges. So it was still that traditional look, but it just didn't require that third person to be in the cockpit.
So kind of groundbreaking in that respect, and some long legs in terms of its service history. I think you said, were there 1,000 or so of these that were made?
1,191 total. I've got a breakdown here. Where did I see that? So there were 976 DC-9s, 1,191 MD-80 series, 116 MD-90 series, which was the follow-on, and there were 115 Boeing 717s, which is actually, you can see those currently flying today. They're still doing passenger service with those. We get those at Tri-Cities every now and again. So those are still out there. So out of those, there were, about 2,441 aircraft in that whole family, the DC-9 family, all the different variations. But the MD-80 was the largest with over 1,000 built. So it was the favorite, the most popular, the most used.
And one of the things that makes this kind of stand apart, recognizable, is that T-tail.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't miss that big high T-tail, the twin engines in the back. That's another, very prominent thing that is noticeable. There is no engines on the wings. So now you've got these super slick wings, which I was reading since there's nothing underneath the wings, there's no pods. You've got low ground clearance. So you can have a folding out door that drops down to the tarmac. So you can load and unload passengers directly from the ground. You don't need any special, walkways, gantries, or anything. You just walk out, walk in, and you're on the aircraft. Same thing goes for loading luggage. You could back a pickup truck up to this and just put the luggage in straight from the back of a vehicle. So you don't need, extensions or lifts or, belts or anything to get luggage in. So, it works great at a small airport that doesn't have that kind of infrastructure built into it, that doesn't have the gantryways and all the, equipment needed to load and unload. So, yes, it sits low to the ground because the engines are mounted on the back up high. Another thing that's good about them being up high is these planes can land on sort of unimproved runways because you've got FOD protection, foreign object debris, from getting up into the engine. That's the wings protecting it from that. So that's another thing. If something's on the runway, it's not going to get into the engine and foul it up. One of the things I did read is that because of its placement, icing is an issue. That if there is icing on the wing root of the aircraft, it will go straight into the engine because they're right there on the sides of the fuselage. So icing is a concern. You have to be aware of that as you're flying. Oh, here's another fun thing I learned. So the fuel on the aircraft, in order to maintain a good center of gravity, because obviously, like I was talking earlier, you've got this big long nose, you have to move the fuel towards the back of the aircraft, and they deliberately pump it up into a tank housed inside that big vertical T-tail. So the fuel, as you're flying, is moved backwards to keep your center of gravity correct. And that was news to me. I didn't know that's how they maintained and managed that. But that's a use of that big tall T-tail, is it holds a little bit of fuel back there.
I would never have known that. That's such a
I didn't know
interesting way of doing things, and it makes you wonder what other aircraft have that type of capability. But that's some good design engineering to use what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Take advantage of what you've got. You got a space there, and you need some weight back in the back. Let's move some fuel back there. So awesome, very cool. Speaking of the engines, they are Pratt & Whitney JT8D 200s. They're sort of an older engine. They are not very new. They're not as fuel efficient as some of the more modern stuff is today, like you'd see in a 737 or the Airbus 319s, 320s. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons that this plane fell out of favor, is because it wasn't fuel efficient. And so when gas prices skyrocketed, this plane became a bit of a money suck. and they had to sort of start retiring them, and that's one of the reasons it's no longer a regular flyer at your local airport.
Yeah, I was reading about how COVID also impacted this aircraft in particular because less people were flying, and so it really needed to have a full cabin to make money. Really, so airlines were losing money when they were flying these guys if they didn't have a full cabin. So that
Exactly.
that really put them when they were figuring out the bottom line on what it's going to look like when as you get through the pandemic. This was a plane they really couldn't afford to fly.
Yeah, no, I mean, money is king in the airlines. Everything's about making money. And if they're not making money with that aircraft and there's something else available, they're going to switch to it. And that's exactly what's happened is now all you see are 737s and A320s. Those are now your short haul aircraft. They take everybody everywhere. So,
well, it is good to know that some of these airframes have survived and moved on into some other roles. So there are some freighter versions, correct, that are still pretty active?
Yeah, very active. I think I read there was over 100 different MD-80s still working in the freight business. There is a company that has it's called an MD-80 SF for special freighter. And they modify old aircraft into freighters. And as of 2021, the note says most operators use the MD-80 SF freighter to carry Ford Motor Company and General Motor automotive parts from Mexico to the U.S. That was its main use. Up in Alaska, they use it for general freight and fish. So, we've got it going down south and up north. So it's, it's a good aircraft. It's very handy. One of the issues with it being a freighter is it's not standard to other aircraft. So like a 757 or anything of that size, they have a standard cargo container that you can put into it. And this one doesn't have it. It's got a lower head height inside the low deck height. So anyway, you have to use some special pallets and things to load this aircraft. But yes, it is. There's over 100 of them still doing freight around. As a matter of fact, the picture that I've got in my background was a freighter that stopped by my local airport. It's probably been 10 years ago now. It's been a long time since I've seen one.
I'm trying to think when the last time I saw one locally. It's been a few years, and I don't think I realized at the time that they were going away so quickly. So
there was an 88. I think it was an 88 Dave Gorman Cameron was telling us about. That was at McGee-Tyson.
Yes, he keeps up with that a lot better than I do. And I
think it was an 88.
You're right that sounds familiar. Hopefully he'll be listening and can chime in with a comment to correct it. And
maybe a picture.
He'll have some great pictures he can share as well.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of ways to track when they're coming in, and our friends who do that kind of stuff regularly know when they're coming. So it is still out there. It is still available to see. I don't think you can book a flight on it though. You can pack yourself as cargo, baby, and see what happens.
If you're a firefighter, you can still take a ride in one because Erickson has I forget how many I read, a few tankers built off of the MD-80 system. They're MD-87 air tankers. And one of the interesting things I read is they have to drop retardant with their landing gear down because of some stalling issues that the aircraft is, the FAA won't certify it to be dropping retardant without the landing gear down. So, that's one of the features of the performance of the airplane is they have to have that down for, I guess, drag to slow it down enough and keep it under control while it's dropping retardant. So the tank capacity on an MD-87 dropping is 4,000 gallons, which sounds like a lot until you compare it to what a 747 tanker can do, which is 19,000 pounds. So there's a lot of difference between the two aircraft.
Mm.
The bigger thing, though, is if you want a quick response, the MD-87 can land at that local airport that's only a couple of miles from the fire, and can get refueled, reloaded, and back into the fight much faster than that big old 747 can. So you've got to weigh what's necessary. Do we need a big dump on this fire, or do we need several small dumps around? And so yes, you can still get one. You can still see one flying as a firefighter. So they're out there.
Well, it seems like, just a little preparation to get your ride, a little firefighter training and all that kind of stuff. But it can be done.
Yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm.
Well, salute to all those brave firefighters and pilots who have created a purpose for this plane to still be used. And the idea of seeing it dropping retardant with its wheels down sounds like quite a sight too. But I'm glad that they were able to adapt this aircraft. So.
Yeah. Did you know that China built the MD-80 series?
Did not know that.
They did. They got a license from McDonnell Douglas and built about 20 aircraft under license, and were using them in China. And apparently the license ran out, and China said, well, we're keeping all the tooling. We're keeping everything we use to make this aircraft. Sorry, goodbye. And they continued to build them as the Cormac ARJ-21 regional jet. So China, both licensed and unlicensed, built an MD-80 aircraft. So like I said, around the world, you can get a ride in one of these things.
Well, it's a fantastic airplane, and one that, like I said, if I knew that they were going to be phasing them out, I would have paid a lot better attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just the history of aviation. Is one day they're everywhere, and the next day it's like they're gone. Where are they? That's just
A6s,
part of life.
Yeah, military planes that you'll never see fly again. A6s, A7s.
Yep.
F8s, all that stuff.
We're watching the demise of the P-3 Orion right now. I hate to see that one go. Lovely plane, but it's on its way out.
You're gonna make me cry.
Well, guys, as we're talking about the MD-80, the Mad Dog, how about closing thoughts? Starting with you, David Rowe.
Well, Mad Dog, let's talk about that for just a second. Why is it called the Mad Dog? Because it takes off like a rocket, and it's a hell of a lot of noise going out the door. So one of the other things is there was also the mention of, if you're familiar with MD 2020, the drink, that was also referred as a possible where the nickname came from. But no, this is a fabulous aircraft, long service life. It's a member of the DC family of jets. So there's a lot of those, a lot of proud people built and flew these aircraft. And like you said, it's a shame that we can't see them fly today, but in their day, we saw them fly all the time.
Dave Gorman, closing thoughts.
I get stuck on that word nostalgia sometimes, because nostalgia is something that was happening when my father was alive that, he saw go out of style over time. It's not supposed to be happening in my lifetime, but this is a good example of a plane that is moved into, that nostalgia, into that memory bank thing. So most people will never fly on one of these again. And so considering it was such a ubiquitous aircraft in its heyday, it was a plane that you were most likely to fly on probably in the 70s and 80s. And great service, great design. And as we mentioned earlier, the design kind of lives on with the CRJs in terms of the size and the engine placement and everything else. So a fun one to think about, and not a lot of these that are on display anywhere, I noticed. So if you want to see one, it might just have to be a freighter version at an airport near you.
Speaking of that, I think I've got 5 listed that you can see in museums. Tulsa Air and Space Museum. Puerto Rico has one. Oklahoma State University has one. Kansas City, Missouri. And there's one in Milan, Italy. So there you go.
So the Midwest of the U.S. or Puerto Rico or Italy, but
there you go.
Amazing. That's amazing. Well, guys, I definitely enjoyed the conversation here, and let's jump into social media, starting with you, David Rowe.
Please go visit aerophile.com, AEROWEPHILE.com. I've got lots of pictures out there. I am loading up some pictures from my Florida vacation slowly but surely. So I will have a lot of those to show. Videos, social media. I'm on all of those under Aerophile. So please come check me out.
Dave Gorman, social media.
Well, you can find me on Gormania as always, which is my YouTube channel, and have still seen a lot of good uptick, I guess, in views after posting about 60 different short videos from Oshkosh of aircraft taxiing. One of the ones that kind of jumped up in views this week, I have that MiG-23 taxiing pass. So
yep.
It makes me sad to look at it, but a lot of people have been wanting to see it lately. Twitter at _ Dave Gorman. I had a tweet that I put out 2 weeks ago or so when a piece of windshield blew off of that same MiG up at Oshkosh, and I was able to show a series of pictures where the plane is flying and then you see the windshield come off. And I think that over the weekend, it went up to, I'll check right now because I'm that kind of Johnny on the spot kind of guy for you. I think there were about 15,000 views maybe, and it's up to 39,000 views. It got shared a whole lot in wake of what happened up in Michigan. Had some people confused and thought that my pictures showed what happened in Michigan, and even though it clearly says the date in Oshkosh.
Oshkosh, yeah.
Social media is only as good and useful as the people who are looking at it as well. So be careful what you read, folks, and pay attention. Those details are important. Instagram, I'm on there too somewhere as it's Dave Gorman. So lots of places to find me and see what I'm thinking about.
Definitely. And the History of Aviation podcast, gosh, we're everywhere. We're on Facebook. We have the Facebook group, History of Aviation Podcast. We're on Twitter, History of AVIA. But what I want to touch on, Dave Gorman, is our Patreon page.
What is Patreon?
Patreon is a program that allows folks to help us out in paying the bills. It takes money to keep this thing going, and we offer special things to our listeners that want to join Patreon. And some of those things is Patreon only updates. So if you're a member of our Patreon page, you'll know before anybody what's going on. That falls under early access. There's a chat community. We'll do a Patreon shout out on the show. And something we've just added to that tier on Patreon is you will be able to join us as we record the show.
Cool.
If you're a Patreon.
So no more free shout outs to Bruce Kawakami. He's going to have to start paying for it, right?
Yeah,
I think so. I think that's, definitely. And then to put the icing on the cake, if you join our Patreon and stay a Patreon for 3 months, we're going to send you a T-shirt, a History of Aviation podcast T-shirt.
Woo-hoo. I wish I were wearing mine now so we could admire it. It's got a great design. Derrick, do you remember who made that design for us?
That would be Mr. David Rowe, our own David Rowe.
Very talented.
Where?
The very talented David Rowe, who has a great eye for design and things like that, and created a very eye-catching design for the History of Aviation podcast. So
thank you. Thank you very much.
Folks join. Thank you. It looks great. I want to see more people wearing it. And I know we're going to talk about going up to Morristown here soon. But people can get these if they join Patreon and stay a member for 3 months?
Yes, 3 months get you a free T-shirt. And then the early access, if you're a member of Patreon, you'll know a week ahead of time what aircraft we're talking about on the next episode. Patreon shout out, of course, and of course you'll attend the live stream of the show. So,
and if they stop Patreon after or before 3 months, then we give their number to Bruce and he calls them, right?
correct.
Okay, it's punishment. Very good. I did mention the Morristown thing. Is it okay? Can we mention?
Yeah, go ahead.
What we have in mind there? Yeah. So we've got there's a fly-in at the EAA chapter up in Morristown, just about a month from now on Saturday. And my gosh, I should have looked up the date really quickly. Let me find it
The
here.
16th.
Thank you.
16th.
I have it in my calendar. Saturday, September 16th. And we're going to be up there with the table, and we'd love to meet some listeners and folks. And I think we'll have some swag that folks can see as well. And look forward to meeting the fine folks up there and visiting the statue of Mama Bird Johnson.
There you go.
Yeah, who trained more people to fly than almost anybody in the world, I think. Sure seems that way anyways. She had a lot of hours in the cockpit, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
So lots going on to look forward to.
Yeah, and we hope to, anybody local here, we hope to see you up in Morristown on the 16th of September.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, guys, I enjoyed it.
Yes, enjoyed it. Fun time.
Thanks. Good
Yep,
stuff today.
And on these links, you can catch our Patreon link below. You can catch all of our social media links, including Dave's and David's. So thank you for listening to the History of Aviation Podcast, episode 28. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the History of Aviation Podcast. Follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. For David Rowe, Dave Gorman, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation Podcast.
This is Joe Morse. You are listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gorman.